Will, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited for this conversation. We've had several other personal finance experts on the show, but we haven't actually gone fully into the topic of how do we teach this to our kids. And I feel like with so much going on in the world these days, money is at the forefront of a lot of our minds in terms of what are the economies going to do, both locally and across the globe. And that's a lot more for maybe than a kid can handle, but we do often find ourselves worrying about our kids' future, the opportunities they're going to have, and that obviously includes helping them learn how to manage their finances. I just got to dive right in with you, Will. Where does somebody get started in teaching these concepts to their children?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show and to talk about this topic because the sooner parents do talk about the money with their kids, the better. It's a crazy statistic that kids pick up many of their adult money behaviors by the age of 7, I think the sort of research shows, which is crazy.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, as soon as parents can start talking about money, the better. But yeah, the way I started with my kids was a very simple analogy. So I said to them, think of money like seeds. Um, and you can give those seeds away, and that's spending. And they already knew about spending. But straight away, my kids, and they were like 4 and 6 years old at the time, said, but what does it mean when you plant them? And it's like, they're starting to get this concept that money's not just for spending. There's these other things. So I said, no, you can plant it. And if you plant it, that money will grow. And they grow into this kind of money trees, and those trees will produce more seeds. And you can kind of over time have this money forest. And they really got latched onto it. And they were like, so whenever I gave them some allowance, my wife and I gave them allowance, we always say to them, what are you going to do with your seeds? How much are you going to give away, spend, but then how much are you going to keep to grow? And at the time, I say they're only 4 and 6. They didn't really ask too many probing questions, but they did get excited about this. And then as they got older, they started to get more curious and say, look, Dad, we've been planting these seeds. What are they? How's that actually work in the real world? And then they start talking about saving accounts and investments, etc. And it just from there just built and built. But just from that youngest age, they got curious about other ways of using money. Because if parents don't teach kids about money, kids are only going to see money for spending, money for spending, money for
Yeah.
spending, and that gets hardwired. And as we know, as we get older, that hard wiring comes really hard to untangle. And then you've got to try and change habits. And then you've got to try and teach them about saving when they're older, and they're harder to teach. So the younger that we can teach these new concepts from a youngest age and start with really good habits of just saving a little bit as we go. So yeah, first of all, it's just starting to talk, and then I use that analogy and just sharing that money to. And again, there's other forms you can give those seeds to charity and all the other forms of money. But yeah, that's how I started with my kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously I want parents listening to this show to get your book, and
Like,
just to tie the two together, you're talking about the concept of planting seeds, using the metaphor, giving it that kind of bite-sized feel for our kids. Do you find that using storytelling helps, or is there another way parents should go about things?
Um, so for me, it's all started with telling stories. So a little bit of background about me. I was in the financial services industry for many years, both in London and then in Hong Kong. And then we decided, I don't know, so about 2017 or something, someone said to me, "Oh, enjoy this time with your kids. They only grow up once." And it's a simple statement, but it had a big
Yeah.
impact. So I say, "Oh, I want to
Yes.
spend more time with my kids." And so my wife and I said, right, we're going to leave the corporate world and spend a period of time not working with our kids. And so in 2019, we left our corporate jobs in Hong Kong and moved to a really cool place called Hoi An in Vietnam. It's an amazing place. But it came to the point where when I was leaving, lots of people said to me, Will, how can you afford not to be working? Like, you're going to just have no income. And I said, I'm going to have an income. We've got our savings and investments that provide an income to us. And these were people who are in the financial service, are giving financial advice to people, but yet they didn't seem to be doing the saving and investing for themselves. So it very
Hmm.
much came across, sparked me that knowledge doesn't mean action. And
Yeah.
so they knew the knowledge, but they weren't implementing it themselves. And so I felt very lucky that my parents were good savers and investors and kind of retired earlier than their peers. And so I kind of took on that. So I was like very determined when my kids are going to be at school, I'm going to teach them like when my thing is going to be teaching them about money. So when I was putting them to bed, I started off trying to teach them about money, and it was they went to bed really quickly, which is good, but that wasn't my aim. I wanted to teach them, and so I started to change it and to do bedtime stories. So I'd either take a real world like adult money story and then make it into a child version, or I'd take a kid story and put a money spin to it. And they really enjoyed it. And the next day they would ask for another story, or they would remember what I taught them the night before and kind of want to talk about a bit more. And so it really did stick with them. And as I said, using that sort of metaphor of the seeds, it was easy for them to remember. It was easy for them to visualize as well, because they're seeing this thing, these trees or it's kind of growing, rather than lecturing them about money. And so I had these characters, and they kind of resonated with those. And as they got older, got more curious. And so I've always stuck with the kind of story methods and then implementing it in real life. So I say when they wanted to save some of their seeds, we would show them, we've got a little spreadsheet which shows them their money. And over time, they can sort of see these little trees growing, which we've got on the screen. And so it worked really well for them, because not only were they hearing the stories, but they were doing something with those stories as well. And then they'll be like, "Oh, Dad, how many trees?" So we call the trees that they plant these blue trees, and hence the name of my website. Um, and so and they'll go, "Oh, how many trees have I got, Dad?" Or "How many trees does my sister have?" Not that I try and encourage the competitiveness, but it came through. Um, and so yeah, they kind of really latched onto the stories. And so yeah, with my in my book that I wrote, Grandpa's Fortune Fables, I kind of put all those bedtime stories together, and they've all got kind of teaching different lessons, but it's got all these characters. So a lot of the readers come back and say, "Oh, my kids love the story about Mr. Lazy," which is all about not investing. Well, when you do invest, just to ignore your investments and be lazy, because Mr. Lazy,
Yeah.
they're all growing these trees and he had the biggest tree because he was lazy. And they just kind of resonate and stick to these stories. So it's a bit like what's this Aesop's fables, and so like the boy who cried wolf. When you're
Yeah.
younger, you probably don't really get the message, but as you grow up, you're like you remember the story, and then the sort of sometimes the
Absolutely.
message comes later, and that's exactly what I want for kids. And I just found it the best way, because yeah, as soon as I start to trying to lecture them about money, they switch off, because money
Yeah.
is quite a dry subject. It's quite numbers focused and stuff like that. So yeah, no, I found stories that for me and my kids a very powerful way of engaging them in a fun way.
Yeah, and I have two follow-up questions, but I want to ask you this one first. We're talking about the blue trees. You know, you say your kids are asking you how many trees they've got, how many does my sister have? Tell us a bit more about that. Is the blue tree like a specific goal? Is it a way of gamifying things? Like, is there a system behind it that maybe the parents listening to this can adopt?
Yeah, so for my children, we have an investment account in my well, we have it in my wife and I's name, and then we have a fund, like it's like an investment fund, global passive income, passive index fund. So just I don't know, I think it's got like 3,600 companies that it invests in one fund, and so like, the money's going in there, and so those funds we just kind of say every kind of that's about £100 because we're from the UK,
Sure.
is kind of one tree. And so every
Nice.
time they put money in, they can kind of see, all right, you're getting close to having another tree. So every time they put some money in, so it's just a unit of their investments that they've got. And then we kind of show them their investments going up and down, and they're a storm. So for them, when they were younger, they just saw it as trees and they didn't care.
Sure.
They just saw each. And then, but as they got older, they were like, "Dad, how do these trees actually grow in real life?" And we had a really fascinating conversation about what is investing and that. So now they know what investing has, and I'm more than happy to share that particular story if of interest.
Quick follow-up, are you incentivizing the trees in any way? Like, is there any type of reward?
No, I haven't had to. And I have had this question before. So as I started young, no, and this is the great bit because I say they were very young, so 4 and 6. They had a few trees at the start when I started talking to this, and they've been adding to it. And they've seen the trees grow because luckily the stock market's been doing relatively well, even though they've seen a few bumps like during COVID.
Sure.
Um, and so they've been like kind of motivated by that rather than having to. And I don't try and force them to save. I always try and encourage them to say it. So just by asking the question of how much are you going to put towards your blue trees, they kind of say, I feel that they're going to do something. Again, I always say it's completely their choice. And I actually encourage them to try and spend most of the money because spending is fun. And I don't want to take it away from them, the sort of joys of spending. But no, I haven't had to encourage them. I know some parents where they're starting a bit later and the kids have already got into that spending habit. And you're
Yeah.
essentially saying, just don't spend as much. And they're like, oh, that's taking away my fun. Um, and that you kind of say, so I know for some younger ones, they've said, well, especially if they're not putting stuff into the stock market. And at the time, interest rates were very low. So they're saying, like, well, put some money, especially if you can put coins or notes into a jar and then just throw in a couple of extra notes or a couple of coins in there just to show that the money's growing visually. It's a really, really powerful one for smaller kids. And yeah, for older kids, potentially if they're in that, I don't want to save mode, then having a little bit more of an incentive to do that, I think it can be really, really powerful. But again, the key bit is not to force them to do that because if they feel forced to do it,
Sure.
then they're probably going to get the sort of resentment and probably not think about money and or see money in a negative light. Just try and encourage and sort of talk about the benefits of doing it, etc., and why other people are doing it, etc., rather than trying to force it. And that goes across all sort of money topics. So you just don't want them to have negative money thoughts because if they do, they're
Yeah.
going to almost do the opposite.
From the research you've done, from the work you're doing helping parents educate their kids on money, do you find that kids who grow up with like a healthy savings habit or at least just a healthier outlook on money, does that translate to higher paying jobs with better benefits, things like that? Or have you delved into that at all?
I don't think so. I've not done any direct research on that, but just kind of anecdotally, there's not been that stronger link in terms of
Okay.
jobs and types of jobs. The biggest bit has just been about financial security
Sure.
for that. There's definitely a strong link between those who do save as kids go on to have more financial security. There is this slight bit around job happiness is more so
Okay.
because and that's linked then to that financial security. So people who are more financially secure are more happy to say, well, look, I don't need to have this job that I hate. I'm going to change. I'm going to either try doing something my own or I'm going to go for another job, even if it's potentially lower pay in the other job, because I have that financial security. Whereas some people who are very much stuck in their jobs because they know financially they can't leave that job. So that's why having that kind of thing. So it's not quite direct, but that's one of the main reasons for teaching kids about money is that they grow up have that financial security or financial health. That then they're not stuck in a place. They've got the ability to be more flexible, and I'm sure that's very similar to the other financial experts you've had on the show in the past.
Sure, sure, sure. Well, I appreciate your thoughts anyway, and I just from my own life agree that as we maybe make a bit more money or are at least saving a lot more, or at least see progress actually. So maybe somebody listening to this is in debt, but if they see that debt number going down and can attribute one benefiting the other, it actually
Yeah.
does increase a sense of overall like satisfaction, well-being, even just peace of mind, like I got this. And
Yes.
so I
Uh,
appreciate your perspective on that. I have to ask you this because we keep touching on it, but not going all the way there. hypothetically, or not so hypothetically for some of the folks listening,
uh,
what if we do have a child who's slightly older? Maybe they're not going to be down for a bedtime story,
yeah, yeah,
but you still want to start doing the work of trying to get these lessons ingrained in a way that isn't condescending, as you said, isn't lecturing. I know that that's something that I have a really bad habit of with my 10-year-old. Where would we begin with that, and what should that approach look like?
yeah. So I've been doing. So I created a program actually for an international school in Singapore, and so that's like 14 to 16-year-olds,
Oh,
and
wow.
so it's a very much different. But actually, the stories and concepts are very similar. But so the key piece for pretty much any age group, and it does touch on in the book for younger kids, but I sort of talk about it in more in a real world aspect. So use real world stories. And so one of the biggest bits is a mindset around money. And it's this difference between being rich and being wealthy, um, especially for sort of that kind of older kids range. Because so just for my definition of rich and wealthy, so rich is kind of having money, but you kind of spend it all. Wealthy is you have money, but you look after that money and you're kind of like
Sure.
kind of a land you having this, you've got some trees that you've grown.
Right.
Um, and they have that. But in the world that they see, they only see rich. They only see those on social media or on the news or piece that are rich, that are spending all their money, and therefore rich. Having money is good. Everyone else doesn't have money because they're not. If they did, surely they'd buy this stuff. And so, just introducing this concept of other people out there who uh, do have money, but they don't just spend it, and they're the ones. So I used the story of Ronald Reed, the millionaire janitor who um, probably had, so say he had part-time jobs, and when he died at about 90 years old, he had like over 8 million US, which has put him in like the
Yeah.
top 1% of wealth. But so he didn't have that. He was very, very wealthy, but clearly didn't come across as being very rich. And it's just he looked after his money, built up, had all the options in the world to do what he wanted. And just having these different characters and real world ones, then you say to people, which one do you want to be like? Again, I'm not saying people want to be like Ronald Reed and not spend any of their money,
Sure.
but it's more about having that security, about being able to grow that money, look after that money, and not be these people who don't have their financial forests out there. And so the one that I had when I was growing up, I used to watch MTV Cribs, you know, the
Yeah.
story ones where they
Yes.
go around. But then you find out some of the backstories, and it's like they hired the house or rented out the house just for the
Yeah.
program. Many of them went bankrupt, or were leasing their cars. And so it was all built on sort of fake premises in a
Yeah.
lot of cases. But yeah, unless someone's being taught that. And so with the school, I have this kind of interactive bit where I show them different characters, real world, well, based on real world, but not using the real names. So you have like a lawyer who's top job, um, has a nice car, you have the sort of sports star, you have the social media star, you have the teacher, and you essentially say, all right, who do you think's financially healthy? And they all have their sort of judgments on that. So the lawyer's doing very well, the sports person's
Hmm.
doing very well, the teacher's probably struggling. But then you give them the sort of more information and you say, well, no, actually, you don't know. You just can't make that judgment because actually the lawyer is kind of almost in knee deep in credit card debt because they're giving off this facade to pay out for their BMWs and their high
Yep.
paying dinners, etc. The sports star is actually, in this case, I think people know the sort of many sports stars are not very good with their money, but actually I did one which
Correct.
was good with their money, social media star who was very poor with their money, and then the teacher who's been gradually saving a little bit of money over time and is financially healthy and looking to retire by the time they're in their 40s. And the whole purpose is just to shine a light on so you cannot make a judgment. You might have those and then you've got to try and think about which kind of person do you want to be like. And it's those
Yeah.
kind of real life decision making concepts. And if you can get them to say, I want to be wealthy, then that should change their actions. And again, it comes
Yeah.
down to the actions rather than the knowledge. Because yeah, if you want to be wealthy, then you have to take the action. So yeah, my whole book and blogs and even the program is all based on what I call the three rules of wealth. And I stress about the wealth piece because it's like about building up that
Yeah.
savings or investments or that forest. And so they're very simple, which is the first one is just save or don't spend all the money that you receive, or keep one out of
Sure.
every 10 that you keep. The second one is try and make that money grow. So invest. And the third one, which is like a superpower, is be patient. um,
Yeah.
which kind of works in that sort of seed, the forest analogy, because you essentially say keep one out of every 10 seeds that you receive. You're only going to grow a forest if you plant it. So that means you have to put it in high interest savings or investments. And then you don't get a forest overnight. You need to be patient. And if you can follow those three actions, that's the foundations of being financially um, healthy and wealthy. And I really want to get that through to kids of all ages, because most of the education for kids is all about delayed gratification, which is good. I don't get
Yeah.
me wrong, I think delayed, but it's all don't spend now because then you can spend in the future, which is great. But I still think it's not as powerful as build your wealth. have that
Sure.
have that money that makes you more money and working for you, so you don't have to worry about always making money yourself. You've got that money supporting you, and the sooner you start, the bigger that forest will grow.
Can I drill down on that and let's go really deep on that? Because that's something that I know a lot of adults struggle with here, especially here in the United States. So, are you familiar with Dave Ramsey? Who that
Yeah,
is? Okay,
yeah,
so huge personal finance influencer, media personality here in the States, and to give him a lot of credit, I feel like his teachings specifically around getting out of debt are actually great. They're wonderful. You know, my wife and I have been on a debt journey, full disclosure, getting it all paid off. But I also feel like it lives pretty far into the extreme of save your money, don't spend anything ever. I feel like it often comes at the risk of people not getting to live their lives. And what I'm getting at is you just said it really well. There's almost like a different energy between I'm going to save and hoard my money and hold on to it forever versus I'm going to invest, I'm going to build something, I'm going to grow something. And even just to use you as an awesome example, like when you and I connected over WhatsApp initially, you and your family were in Spain. As we're recording this, you're in South Asia and you are living this life that you've designed. It had to cost some type of money somehow. So I guess I'm asking you, how do people strike that balance? Is it mentally, like in their mindset? Is it just the actions they take? Can you go a bit deeper on that?
yeah. So it's definitely about that mindset piece of what you want to do with your money, it's and this is why it's so important for kids to learn about money, because it's so hard as adults. So I just
Yes.
when you're so what I'm trying to get parents to say to their kids is say, look, let them spend 90% of the money that they receive. The difference between 190 should not change how much fun they have. Like if you go through, and if they get into that kind of habit of saving that 10 over time, that's going to make sure that their lifestyle increases as they earn more money. They still get to spend lots, but they're building that wealth. And that's so important, because as adults, if you start later, as you've kind of mentioned about debt there, it's really hard to change, because you've essentially got to say, right, I've got to change my habits to sort of spend less money. But that's not the hardest bit. It's to essentially say, to give off the perception of, I need to tell the world that I can't spend as much money as I was. And that's the
Yeah.
hardest bit for adults, is
Yes.
being that, having that, being humble enough to say, look, I've spent too much. I need to change. I can't afford that type of car. I've got to spend this on this type of car, or I'm only going to spend money on the things that I really care about. I was buying these things to give off an image or just keep up with the Joneses. I'm not going to do that anymore. And people are going to be like, ah, why are you not doing that anymore? And then you're probably more worried about the judgment than that actually being a reality, because everyone only cares about themselves, not really what other people are doing with their money, but people. And so that's why I think it's so powerful to talk to kids, because you don't want them to go get too later in life and then trying to roll back. I know Dave Ramsey does a great job of helping people do that. But the key bit is to get children in the mindset of, save that little bit. And if we all think about, if I'd have saved 10% of all the money I've ever received, imagine how much money I'd have now, especially with
Right.
compounding.
Right.
It's huge. It's a great habit. But yeah, for adults and older, sort of younger, potentially adults who have already got into that, yeah, it's about those three rules of wealth that I mentioned of save a little bit, invest it, and be patient. And it's got to be like, that's what I'm going to do. I have to do it, and I'm going to do it for these reasons. I'm going to do it for my own reasons. I have to give up this second view about what people thinking about me, and I say keeping up with the Joneses. But it is that it's all in the mind. It's not an action one, because I say you can start taking the actions, but in your mind, if you're still comparing yourselves to other people and worried about that kind of piece, then you're never going to take those actions. And so it comes to self-esteem and etc. So yeah, so I hope that was answered more about why it's so important to do kids. But I think even for adults, it's not just about action and knowledge. It's about having that right mindset to say, look, I need to change. I need to live a different lifestyle to what I've had before. I know Dave Ramsey goes to very, very extremes, which I think
Sure.
is harder. My view would probably be definitely take that advice, but maybe start smaller and work bigger, but it depends on how big it's impacting people's lives. It's easy to essentially judge from a distance and generalize.
Yeah, of course. And for anyone listening to this, I'm not throwing Dave Ramsey's advice out the window. Like, full disclosure, I actually think it's some of the best, specifically debt pay down advice, some of the absolute
Yeah,
best out there. And
oh, yeah,
we've been on
yeah,
that
I agree.
plan for a while. I want to shift the focus slightly because, it's probably going to be the parents listening to this more than anything. So you've gotten to create, I think, a life that a lot of folks dream of, or maybe they're even afraid to dream of a bit. And I would love to just kind of go back to where you were. You said you were in the finance career, and you've really created this life for yourself, living in different countries, being able to visit different parts of the world. Where did that start, and what was maybe the first action or the first hurdle you had to get over in your mindset in order to allow you to want this and to pursue it?
Oh, well, so I think the reason for doing it was probably a combination of different little bits. So there's one, as I mentioned earlier, the sort of comment about um, spending time with the kids. So they only grow up once.
Yeah.
So I was like, yep. Then there's reading the book, The 4 Hour Work Week from Tim Ferriss,
Yes.
where he talks about mini retirements, which had never really crossed my mind. So even though I've been advising all these retirement schemes on their investments, I never thought about mini retirements. And so having this concept of, well, let's take 3 years out of work now, and we'll just, even if we spend 3 years worth of salary, we'll just make up for it by retiring at 68 or something rather than 65. I'd rather have this time now than probably in the future. Hopefully, I think we're going to be fine that we can still retire at a good age. So I think that came into my mind. And then it was just going through, is this a possibility? Because we're in Hong Kong, Hong Kong's a great base to sort of see the whole of Asia, and some of the places
Yeah.
we were going to, like Vietnam, where we ended up going, and Thailand, where we are now, were just amazing. Like just the culture, the food, the people was just wow. Imagine if we lived there. So it's all these little bits coming together, and that's so the biggest challenge was actually for me is when I proposed this idea to my wife. I said, I think we should take some time off, and her response, as kind of alluded to in the question, is, but no one does this. Why? If it's a good idea, everyone would do this. And I was like, I just don't think anyone's really, it just doesn't come onto anyone's kind of radar. And it didn't come onto my radar naturally. So for most of my career, my life was go to school, go to university, get a good job, work there for 40 years and then retire. And that was kind of ingrained into what life is and kind of enjoy it along the way. This concept of living in other countries or taking this time off didn't come. It just, as I say, it's a combination of these different kind of factors that I put together and said, right, can we do this? And so I'm an actuary by background, so we look at risks a lot. So
Sure.
we put it together and said, right, if we do this, what's the risks? So luckily, from a financial perspective, we felt if anything's went wrong, we can survive financially. and we did lots of sort of scenario pieces. We had money. We always thought that we both were doing well in our careers. So if we needed to go back, I think we had the security that we would find either go back to our previous jobs or similar jobs in that field. So we didn't have, it wasn't like we're going to be living on the streets
Sure,
if this
sure,
didn't work
sure.
out. But I think the biggest one for us was even if it doesn't work out, we'll have a nice story to tell. So
Yeah.
if it works out well, we'll have a story to tell. But even if it doesn't work out, we'll still have an interesting story. We tried this thing and it was horrible, and we couldn't wait to get back to England or Hong Kong. But it's just something a bit more interesting for that. And so we just thought, let's just do it. And then we said we're going to do it for 2 years. We ended up in Vietnam for 3 years, and now we're in Thailand because we were going to plan to go back to the UK, but we kind of fell in love with Southeast Asia. And so it's
Mhm.
all about looking at the downsides and actually are those downsides proper downsides. Um, but yeah, and it's just getting over that inertia of saying we're going to do something different from what most people do. And the great thing is, as soon
Yeah.
as we got there, we found lots of other people who had done exactly the same thing as us. And
I
so you
love
felt
that.
you're in this like little community bubble of people all there for different reasons. Some were doing like teaching and just doing before they going into careers. Some were like they had their own companies and sold their companies and decided to move there. So it was just a fascinating, and I learned so much. And the different people I met were just, or have met, have just been super fascinating. So it's been a great experience. But it's also been a great experience for our kids. So even on the topic of kids and money, so we lived in like just outside of London in the UK and then Hong Kong,
Yeah.
which are just full of abundance. And so I remember going on like one Saturday in Hong Kong, just going for a Saturday lunch for a pizza. So two kids' meals and two sort of adult meals for just something to eat on. And it was like $90 or something. And I was just like,
Wow.
it's a lot of money just for, we weren't really, like, we're not enjoying it, but it was just a lunch.
Yeah.
But it just felt, and I was like,
Nothing you're gonna remember.
exactly. And I was like, this is just so much money, and my kids are just going to take this for granted. And so, not that I thought about it at the time, it's more in hindsight. But then we go to Vietnam, where you're paying like you're having this amazingly fresh meal with like herbs, and it's all being cooked in front of you, and it's like it's so tasty, and it's like $5 for the whole family. And you're like, wow. But it's also the kids that they're interacting with. So in Hong Kong, you had the kids who are wearing the designer clothes and going to all these places. And they all had their phones, whereas my kids didn't have phones in Hong Kong. And then we go to Vietnam, and we're living next to Vietnamese families who only the parents had a phone, and there were the old touch button phones. And so all the kids were just playing outside, and there's like a little waterway, and they're building
Yeah.
paper boats and racing them down this waterway. And my kids are getting involved. I'm like, this is amazing. They're like
I love that.
seeing a different kind of lifestyle to what they're not say one's better than the other really, well I've probably got view, but it's more just them getting to see that sort of diversity of lifestyle and saying what get them to appreciate what they had it when we were in Hong Kong, getting relative to what we saw as other families in different places. So it's been an amazing experience and so happy. So yeah, if parents are listening to this, yeah, and they can. I'd strongly recommend just taking that chance. I say most of the time that the downsides can be turned into positives.
Yeah. And just to double down on what you're saying, folks, the message here is Will had the dream. He weighed the benefits of pursuing the dream versus everything that could go wrong, but didn't allow the dream to get diminished
Yeah,
by the fear of what could possibly go wrong. And I loved particularly what you said around if this doesn't work out, at least we'll have a great story and memories to reminisce over. And
yeah,
I think that's so true. And I think that no matter if we're talking about money or goals or living situations, oftentimes the thing that goes horribly wrong actually becomes one of the best stories we get to tell later. And I'm sure everybody listening to this, you, Will, and myself, we all have things that we thought were going to work out all hunky dory and just don't. And they continue to just be experience and stories. And I actually even find the things that don't go right allow me to relate to other people even better.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's a hidden gift that many of us don't catch in the moment when the thing feels that big. But I just want to acknowledge you, particularly for having the dream, creating the plan, and going for it. And you are, I think you said 3 years beyond your original
Yeah.
plan of living
Ah,
in Vietnam for 2 years. So
yeah.
like it, I hope the folks listening to this can hear like anything's possible with enough dream and willpower, and getting a plan in place is really what it's about.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's having that. I say it might take a period of time to get there. And I think so going back to my parents, and I said I was lucky about them. So one of the big bits people will say, oh, did you my parents kind of teach me about money? And I was like, no, well, my dad claims that he did, but I can't remember any particular bits. But the important bit about my parents was um, we lived in the same house all of my childhood. So um,
Sure.
I finished university, and I stayed there for about a year after university. But as soon as I moved out, so I was like 22 years old, my parents said, "Okay, good, right, we're retiring and we're going to go move to Spain." So you mentioned I was in Spain. I was seeing my parents there,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they had a plan, and so they were slightly different from what we did, but they essentially they said, right, our goal is to pay off our mortgage so we can retire early and leave the UK and go to sunny Spain. And so I knew that they were getting pay rises as they were going and bonuses because of their jobs, etc. But they didn't move into, we had a three bed house. So it wasn't, but they could have bought a big house as some of my friends were doing. They were kind of moving into sort of different areas of where we were. But my parents didn't. They stayed there. They just paid off their mortgage. We still went on holidays and they still had cars, but never like the fanciest cars. They didn't care about. They weren't into like their fashions, and so that had a really big impact on me because they clearly had, as you mentioned, that they had a plan and they stuck to it, and it helped them give that focus. So when their friends were buying these nicer clothes or bigger houses or nicer cars, they didn't care because they're like, our focus is on our plan. Whereas most people don't have a plan and therefore their
Right.
money is loose. Their money's very loose because their money can go anywhere because they haven't got a plan. As soon as you get a plan, you're like, that's what I want to do. And therefore
Yes.
you don't care about this other stuff because I've got my plan. And so when I was phoning up my parents when I was like starting just after university, and I was like, oh, I've just worked 60 hours this week. It's been really grueling, but I've learned a lot of enjoying it. And they're like, oh, yeah, we just went and saw this nice little village and we painted a chair or something in the evening. And I'm like, I so want that life. And that really
Sure.
inspired me then to sort of put my money to a plan. And so again, yeah, that point about having a plan really helps to focus what you do with money. And I'm hoping my kids will have a plan, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that what we've done with them and have this opportunity, if they want to have a family when they're older, that they want to have that kind of time with them to take time off work or start their own little business. They'll have the sort of financial freedom to do so.
Oh, so good. And folks, just have the audacity to have a dream, and then to Will's point, create a plan around it. And if you're married, it definitely gets to involve your spouse in part of the planning. Like we don't get to do these things
Yeah.
independently, but we really only get one shot at this thing called life. And so you actually owe it to yourself to spend it the way you want to the best of your ability. It doesn't mean everything's going to work out necessarily, but by not going for it, you're guaranteeing that it won't, if that makes sense. So, Will, this has been an amazing conversation. I want to make sure the listeners know where to connect with you, where to get the book. What are the best ways for them to do both?
So my website, which is bluetreesavings.com, has blogs on there about pretty much any money topic that you want to teach your kids. Some of the most popular ones have been how to teach your kids about the stock market, which uses McDonald's and Lego and Blockbuster Video. But it also has details around my book, so Grandpa's Fortune Fables. So if you've got kids sort of 6 years, sort of 6 to 12 years old, or can be read to younger kids, it's got details on there, and that's available on Amazon. But I'm also on LinkedIn. So if you look up Will Rainey, I generally post a few posts a week with some kind of tips linked to money, which are again for parents, but actually I think a lot of parents go, that's quite useful for themselves. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, and just to give you a shout out, Will, this is actually how I became familiar with you and your work. A colleague of mine shared one of your articles, which was great, all about sales, and I was just like, I need to get this guy on my show, and here we are. So definitely worth the follow. Everybody, be sure to follow Will on LinkedIn, and all of his contact info and the link to the book are going to be made available in the show notes, no matter where you are catching this episode. So do yourself a favor, do your family a favor, and connect with him, get these resources, because that's what they're there for. Will, I want to ask you this question. I ask all my guests before we head out. What are you acknowledging yourself for today?
Acknowledging myself for today. Um, I think I've acknowledged myself for, I suppose, yeah, I'm going to say about my kids and just spending time with them. I'm just really enjoying. They're now 10 and 12 years old, and the fact that I'm kind of always give myself some time just to have a chat with them, and I think that's great for me, and I'm hoping it's going to be great for them as well, just to have chats rather than talking about school, talking about anything else, just having a chat, and I really enjoy that. So a kind of highlight of my day, and I hope it's going to have an impact on them. So I'm proud to be able to do that.
I love that. I love that so much. I know that with my 10-year-old, I try to grab whatever pockets of time I can with him with just our busy schedule. So I acknowledge you for creating a life that I think a lot of parents aspire to, which is just to be present and there for our kids. And so I appreciate you being on today, not only sharing your wisdom, but also sharing what's possible for the people listening to this.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's great that we get the opportunity to talk about this topic because it's, yeah, the more children learn about money, I think the better the world will be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And folks, this has been another episode of Your Inside Track to Success. I know you got value out of today's conversation, so please share this out with at least one other person. Cost of admission is always free, so just do your part in getting messages and conversations like this one with Will out to as many people as possible so that we can support as many people in creating the lives of their dreams. We'll catch you next week with another guest or message. We'll see you then.